I shouldn't remember the exact shade of her nail polish. But I do. Dark burgundy. Almost black in the dim light of her dining room. She kept tapping the end of her pen against the table while I pretended, to focus on the textbook in front of me. The thing is, she wasn't supposed to be anything but my tutor. That's how we'd set it up. One evening a week, her place, a couple of hours of help so I could finally scrape by in my literature requirement. She lived alone. No husband. No kids. A tidy, quiet house on the edge of town, where the curtains stayed drawn even during the day. Tonight it smelled faintly of rain. She'd left the kitchen window open, and coffee gone cold in the mug beside her. My notebook was full of underlines, none of them helpful. "You're drifting," she said softly. I looked up. She wasn't smiling. She never smiled when she caught me doing it, looking at her instead of the page. "Sorry," I murmured, though I didn't look away. Her hair was loose tonight, falling forward every time she bent over the book to point something out. I wanted to reach over and tuck it behind her ear. I didn't. "You know the rules," she said, leaning back in her chair. The words weren't sharp, they never were. Just steady. "Focus here, not on me." She tapped the text. I nodded, but my chest felt tight. She was older, mid-40s, I guessed, and carried herself like someone who'd already decided how much of herself the world was allowed to see. But once in a while I caught these moments. Pause in her breath. A glance that lingered a fraction too long. A question asked in a tone just shy of casual. I don't think she knew I noticed. We worked in silence for a while. The only sounds the rain outside and the soft scratch of her pen across the margin of my paper. My thoughts kept drifting to her hands. How they moved, precise and calm. How her thumb brushed the side of the pen when she was thinking. At one point, she reached over, her fingers brushing mine as she slid my notebook closer to her. It wasn't on purpose, at least that's what I told myself. But I felt the warmth of her skin long after she pulled back. "You're better at this than you think," she said without looking up. The room felt smaller then, like the air had shifted. "I'm only better because of you," I said quietly. That made her glance at me, quick and searching, like she was checking for something I wasn't supposed to give away. For a moment she didn't speak. The pen stilled in her hand. Then she leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You also know what I want," she said. Not in a teasing way. Not in a careless way. It was careful. Weighted. Like each word had been tested before it left her mouth. My pulse kicked. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I couldn't make my voice work. She closed the book between us, the sound louder than it should have been in the quiet room. "Next week," she said, standing. "We'll pick up from here." But when I stood to leave, she stepped closer than she needed to. Close enough that I caught the faint trace of her perfume. Something warm, not floral. Close enough that I saw her hesitate before pulling back. The rain had stopped outside. My hand was on the doorknob when she spoke again, voice low. "You know the rules," she said. Then softer. "But maybe they're not the only thing you know." I walked home in the dark, but her voice kept following me. "You know the rules. Maybe they're not the only thing you know." I didn't sleep much, and when I did, my dreams weren't about the text we were studying. The next week, the rain was gone, replaced by heavy summer heat. Her windows were open, letting in the slow hum of cicadas. She wore a loose linen shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the first two buttons undone. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. There was something in her tone, less guarded than before, but heavier somehow. We started with the usual notes, questions, the soft shuffle of papers, but it didn't feel usual. Not after last time. Half an hour in, she leaned back in her chair, rubbing the side of her neck. "Sorry. Long day. What happened?" I asked before I could stop myself. She hesitated. "I shouldn't. It's not really your business." Then, almost as if she was talking to herself, "I had to meet with my lawyer this morning. Divorce stuff. It was the first personal thing she'd told me. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. But I watched the way her hand stayed at her neck, the faint tremor in her fingers. "You okay?" I asked finally. She gave a small laugh without looking at me. "I've been better." We went back to the lesson, but my focus was gone. Every movement she made seemed sharper now. The way she tucked one leg under the other, the way she chewed lightly at the inside of her cheek when she read. At one point, her pen slipped from her fingers, rolling across the table toward me. I picked it up and handed it back. My fingers brushed hers, just for a second, but enough to make my stomach knot. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" I could have lied. I almost did. But then I caught the way she was looking at me, not just as a tutor, not just as someone older checking in on a student. It was softer, more curious. "About last week," I admitted. She didn't pretend not to know what I meant. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying me like she was weighing a decision. The air between us felt different now. Thicker, harder to breathe. I wanted to ask if she meant what she'd said, but the words wouldn't come. She glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at me. "You're not in a rush, are you?" "No, good. Stay a little longer," she said, her hand resting lightly on my forearm. It was the first time she'd touched me that wasn't accidental. I should have pulled back. I didn't. Her hand lingered just long enough to make it clear she knew I wouldn't. The extra half hour turned into an hour. We weren't really working anymore. The textbook lay open, but she'd stopped pointing at the page, and I'd stopped pretending to take notes. We were just talking. She told me about her first apartment after college, how she'd slept on a mattress on the floor because she couldn't afford a bed frame. I told her about the time I nearly failed a class because I couldn't stand the professor. Felt easy, almost normal, until it didn't. She was leaning forward, elbow on the table, chin resting on her palm. "You know," she said, "I'm not usually like this." "Like what?" "Letting someone in so quickly." The words landed heavier than they should have. I wanted to ask why me, but I didn't. I just watched her fingers trace the rim of her coffee mug, slow, almost distracted. I realized my own knee had drifted closer under the table, brushing hers lightly. I pulled it back instantly, heat crawling up my neck. She noticed. "You don't have to do that," she said. Her tone was unreadable. Before I could answer, her phone rang. The sound sliced the moment in half. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening. "It's my ex," she murmured. I looked away, giving her space, but I could still hear her voice. Low, careful. "No, I told you. I'm not discussing this tonight. No, I don't care. Not now." She hung up quickly, setting the phone face down on the table. "Sorry," she said, not meeting my eyes. "You don't have to apologize." But the air between us had changed again. She looked at me for a long second, as if weighing whether to say more. Then she stood, walking to the counter. When she came back, she handed me a glass of water, her fingers brushing mine again. This time, neither of us moved away. "You should probably go soon," she said quietly. But she didn't pull her hand back right away. "I know." Neither of us moved. My mind was screaming at me to step away, to keep it where it was safe. Instead, I said, "We could." A knock at the door cut me off. Her hand dropped instantly. She stood, smoothing her shirt, glancing at me with something like panic in her eyes. I heard a voice outside, muffled, male. She opened the door just enough to speak through it. "Now's not a good time," she said firmly. A pause. Then footsteps fading away. She closed the door and leaned against it for a second, eyes closed, breathing slowly. When she turned back to me, her gaze was steady. "Where were you going with that sentence?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Nowhere." She stepped closer, too close, her shadow spilling over me. "I don't believe you," she said softly. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I was about to walk out, or if we were about to cross the line entirely. She didn't move away this time. The space between us had been narrowing for weeks, but tonight it felt like there was nowhere left to retreat. "I don't believe you," she'd said, and now she was close enough that I could see the faint crease at the corner of her mouth, the way her breathing had slowed. I should have made a joke, broken the tension. Instead, I said, I wasn't going to stop myself. Her eyes didn't widen, but I caught the faintest shift in her posture, like she'd been bracing for that answer and still wasn't ready for it. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured. "You asked." Her gaze flicked to the clock, then back to me. "If I let you finish that sentence, what would you have said?" The air felt thick, hot, pressing against my skin. I swallowed. "That I wanted to stay." Something in her face softened, then tightened again, like she was trying to decide whether to let that sink in or throw it away. "This is dangerous," she said. "I know." She stepped around me, pacing once before stopping near the table. "You think I don't notice? How you look at me, how you never leave right on time." I didn't answer. "You're not my student in the way you were at the beginning," she said quietly. "But you're still too close to that." "That's not all I am," I said. Her head snapped toward me. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "I'm just saying—" "No," she cut in. "You're not just saying. You're telling me you want something you shouldn't." I almost stepped toward her. Almost. But then she turned, leaning against the table, arms crossed like she was holding herself in place. The room felt like it had shrunk. My thoughts were loud, messy. Part of me wanted to push, the other part wanted to run before I ruined it all. She let out a long breath. "I had someone once. Someone younger. It didn't end well. I swore I'd never—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "What happened?" I asked. Her eyes met mine. "I got attached." "They didn't." I stepped closer without realizing it, the space between us collapsing until I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. "You think that's me?" I asked. Her lips parted like she was about to speak, but no words came. We stood there, both of us waiting for the other to move first. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "Tell me I'm wrong." The silence that followed was so heavy I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I didn't answer, and she didn't step back. The air between us was still charged when her phone buzzed again. She didn't move to answer, but I saw the name flash on the screen before she turned it face down. It was my brother's name. I stared at it for a second, certain I'd imagined it. "Why is he calling you?" Her expression flickered. Guilt, surprise, something else I couldn't name. "That's complicated. Try me," I said. She hesitated, then stepped back, breaking the closeness we'd been standing in for what felt like hours. "We knew each other, before you and I ever met. A long time ago." My chest felt tight. "How long ago?" "Before he left town. Before I married." Her voice was even, but she wasn't looking at me anymore. "We were friends. Briefly more than that." I didn't know what to say. The room suddenly felt different, like the walls had moved a few inches closer. "You didn't think to tell me?" I asked. "I didn't think it mattered," she said quickly. "Until now." The way she said now told me she understood exactly how much it mattered. I moved toward the table, putting some space between us. "So all this was I just—" "No," she said sharply. "Don't do that. Don't twist it into something it's not." I turned to face her. "Then tell me what it is." She was silent for a long beat. Then, "It's something I shouldn't want. But I do." That landed harder than it should have. Before I could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Fast. Insistent. We both froze. She moved to the door, hesitated, then cracked it open just enough to see who it was. "Hey!" a voice said. Male. Familiar. My brother. She stepped outside, pulling the door almost shut behind her, but not enough to block the sound completely. You didn't call me back, he said. I told you, I can't do this right now. You're avoiding me. I stayed perfectly still, every muscle tense, listening. I'm not, she said. I just have someone here. There was a pause. Then his voice, lower. Someone? Or him? She didn't answer right away. My pulse was pounding in my ears. Finally, she said, You need to leave. The footsteps faded, and she came back in, closing the door behind her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. He knows, I said finally. She looked at me, something fierce in her eyes now. Then we don't have much time to decide what happens next. I didn't know if she meant tonight or us. Either way, the rules we'd been holding on to were slipping fast. She stood by the closed door, her hands still resting on the knob like she wasn't sure if she should lock it or open it again. Sit, she said. Not a request. I stayed where I was. Why didn't you tell me about him? Because I knew it would change the way you look at me, she said, finally letting go of the door. And I didn't want that. You thought I'd just stop feeling this way? Her eyes softened, but there was no smile. I hoped you wouldn't have to. I laughed under my breath, though nothing was funny. That's not how this works. She moved toward the table slowly, each step measured, like she was walking into something she couldn't turn back from. And how does it work, then? I swallowed hard. It works like this. I can't stop thinking about you. I've tried. I've told myself every reason why I shouldn't. But none of them matter when I'm here. Her breath caught, so faint I almost missed it. She sat down, resting her elbows on the table. You think I don't feel it too? I think you're better at hiding it. We sat there, neither of us breaking eye contact. The cicadas outside had gone quiet, leaving the room so still I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. You know what happens if we do this, she said finally. I know, I said, and I'm still here. Something shifted in her expression, less guarded now, more tired, like she'd been holding up a weight for too long. I don't want to ruin you, she whispered. You won't, I said, leaning forward. You'll ruin me if you keep pretending. For a moment, I thought she'd tell me to leave. Instead, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine, then closing around them. Her hand was warm, steady. This is a choice, she said quietly. Once I make it, I don't take it back. Then make it, I said. Her thumb grazed the side of my hand in a slow, deliberate motion. Her eyes searched mine, looking for something, hesitation, maybe. She didn't find it. You stay tonight, she said. Not a question. My pulse kicked hard. Are you sure? Yes, she said, her voice steady now. I'm tired of wanting something and pretending I don't. We stayed there, holding onto each other's hands, the moment stretching out between us like a bridge we were finally ready to cross. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the wall before fading away. Neither of us moved. We didn't need to. The decision was already made. The morning light in her kitchen was softer than I expected. I'd woken to the sound of the coffee maker sputtering, the faint smell of toast, and the quiet hum of her moving around barefoot. No textbook on the table now. No papers, no pens, just 2 mugs and the weight of everything that had shifted overnight. She slid one toward me and sat down across the table. Do you regret it? I asked. Her eyes stayed on her coffee for a moment before lifting to mine. No, but I'm scared. I nodded. Me too. It wasn't the reckless, heat-driven fear from last night. It was something steadier. The fear you feel when you've actually chosen something, when you know it will change everything afterward. She reached across the table again, fingers brushing mine the way they had so many times before, only now there was no reason to pull back. It's not just about you, she said. It's about what this means. For both of us. I thought about my brother, about how his voice had tightened when he asked if it was me, about the knock on her door, the look in her eyes when she said we didn't have much time. I'll tell him, I said, before he hears it from anyone else. She blinked, surprised. You'd do that? I'd rather he hate me for the truth than for a lie. She was quiet for a moment, studying me. Then she smiled, small, almost cautious, but real. You're not who I thought you were when you first walked in here. And who's that? Someone who wouldn't stay. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was something else, like the pause before music starts again. We didn't make promises we couldn't keep. We didn't pretend this would be simple. But we both knew we weren't walking away. By the time I left, the air was warmer, the cicadas louder, the street outside bright with late morning sun. I turned back at the gate and saw her watching me from the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame. There was no rule to break anymore, no line to hover at, just the space between where we'd been and where we were going, and the choice to walk into it together. As I headed down the street, I realized something. It had never really been about crossing a line. It had been about what we found when we finally stopped pretending the line was there at all. And for once, that felt like the safest place I'd ever been.